So how on earth does a fringe, underground spectacle, something once called human cockfighting, become a multi-billion-dollar global sports empire? It sounds pretty crazy, right? Well, today, we're going to break down the incredible, controversial, and absolutely wild story of the Ultimate Fighting Championship. Okay, so you have to start at the very beginning, and the beginning was this. There are no rules. I mean, that was their actual marketing slogan for the first UFC event back in 1993. Now, it wasn't technically true, but man, it perfectly captured that brutal, chaotic vibe they were going for. This thing was designed to be as shocking as it was revolutionary. All right, so the big question is, how do you get from no rules to a sanctioned global sport? Well, this first chapter in the UFC story is all about a forced evolution. It was a desperate race to try and tame the very beast they had just created. This was the simple and, pretty violent question that UFC 1 was all about. This wasn't about points or judges or anything like that. Nope. It was a one-night, 8-man tournament that pitted completely different martial arts against each other. We're talking a sumo wrestler versus a savate fighter, a boxer versus a jiu-jitsu master, all to finally see which style would come out on top in a real fight. You know that whole no rules thing? It couldn't last. It just wasn't sustainable. And this timeline really shows you just how fast they had to change. I mean, look at this. By UFC 12, they're like, okay, we probably need weight classes so we don't have massive size differences. Then, boom, mandatory gloves come in. And eventually we get the 5-minute rounds we all know today. It was this really rapid, almost frantic evolution from a bloody show into a real sport, which all kind of came together when they adopted the unified rules at UFC 28. But here's the thing. Even with all those changes, it just wasn't happening fast enough for the outside world. By the late 90s, the UFC's reputation for sheer brutality had totally caught up with it, and the entire thing was pushed right to the very edge of extinction. The political backlash was fierce. Senator John McCain famously led a whole campaign to ban the sport, and you know what? It worked. The big pay-per-view companies dropped the UFC, it was banned in 36 states, the promotion was basically driven underground, forced to hold events in small towns, completely hidden from the mainstream. It became this toxic brand that nobody wanted to touch. So, with no TV deals and all this political pressure, the money situation got dire. By 2001, the original parent company was just hemorrhaging cash and facing complete ruin. They were forced to sell the damaged UFC brand for just $2 million. I mean, $2 million. That seems insane now, but at the time, that's really all it seemed to be worth. And this is where the whole story takes this incredible turn. In 2001, just as it looked like it was all over, new owners stepped in, and they came with a new vision, a lot of their own money, and a plan to not just save the UFC, but make it bigger than anyone could have ever possibly imagined. This quote from the legendary referee Big John McCarthy just perfectly captures that first real glimmer of hope. He's talking about UFC 40, which had superstars Tito Ortiz and Ken Shamrock. That night, it felt different. The place was packed, the production quality was way better, and for the first time in years, it really felt like the UFC wasn't just surviving anymore. It actually had a future. So, how did they pull it off? Well, the new owners, Lorenzo and Frank Fertitta, along with Dana White, had this 3-step rescue plan. First, they bought the company. Simple enough. Second, they poured millions into getting the sport sanctioned and making it look professional on TV. But the third step? That was the absolute game changer. They funded a reality show, The Ultimate Fighter, all on their own dime. And that show was a smash hit. See, for the first time, audiences saw the fighters not just as brawlers, but as real, dedicated athletes with compelling personalities. It totally humanized the sport for a massive new TV audience and completely changed the game. So, with the UFC finally in the mainstream, the strategy shifted. It wasn't about survival anymore. Now, it was all about total domination. Their strategy was pretty simple, really. If you can't beat 'em, buy 'em. The UFC went on an absolute shopping spree, systematically buying out and absorbing every single one of its major competitors. Japan's legendary Pride Fighting Championships, gone. The WEC, with all its exciting lighterweight fighters, absorbed. Its biggest American rival, Strikeforce, bought out. They didn't just want to be the biggest promotion, they were aiming to be the only one. And then, another huge driver of growth came along in 2012. After Dana White had famously said that women would never fight in the octagon, he was convinced to change his mind by the undeniable star power of one person, Ronda Rousey. Her arrival launched the women's divisions, and she became one of the most dominant and marketable champions the UFC has ever seen, opening the sport up to a whole new audience. And that brings us to the modern era. See, the UFC is no longer the underdog. It's a financial powerhouse. But all that success has created a new, really complex main event, a high-stakes legal battle with its own fighters. If you want to understand the scale of this success, just look at this number, $4 billion. That's what the Fertitta brothers sold the UFC for in 2016. I mean, think about it. They bought a dying company for $2 million, and just 15 years later, they sold it for $4 billion. That's just an incredible turnaround. But that very dominance is now at the heart of a huge class action lawsuit from former fighters. On one side, the UFC's position is that they operate in a competitive market for talent, but the fighters claim that the UFC deliberately eliminated all the competition just to create a monopoly, and then used that power to keep fighter pay artificially low. The whole lawsuit really boils down to three key arguments. First, that the UFC holds a monopoly over the market for elite MMA fighters. Second, that it got that power by systematically buying out its rivals. And third, that this alleged monopoly has directly hurt fighters by keeping their pay lower than it would be in a truly competitive market. And yet, through all these legal battles, the sport itself has never been more established. This just gives you a little snapshot of how structured it's all become. We now have all these distinct weight classes for both men and women, with champions from all over the globe. It's the ultimate result of that chaotic evolution, a structured, professional, global sport that is a world away from that 8-man, no-rules tournament back in 1993. The journey has been nothing short of remarkable. From a bloody experiment designed to answer a pretty simple question to a global sports powerhouse that crushed all of its competition. But it leaves us with one final and pretty crucial question. In achieving total dominance, has the UFC now become too powerful for the long-term health of the very sport it brought to the world?